I mean, how desperate is it that Ukraine still has to bring across that basic message after so many years?
I really like how you actually started this hour with the fact that Zelensky is coming up to Munich Security Conference with pretty much the same speech year after year for 3 years in a row. And I believe it's a shame. It's a shame that he comes with the same speeches, but the reaction of Europe is pretty slow. And therefore, he is forced to actually come and appeal with the same things. And it's a shame because of few facts. Well, first, because Russia or Russian army is attacking not only Ukrainian army, and recently it's like barely Ukrainian army, but rather Ukrainian civilians.
Yeah.
They are attacking our infrastructure. Last night, they attacked a children's hospital in Sumy. They are hitting power plants to freeze Ukrainians to death. They are attacking schools, and they know exactly where to hit. So it's not a mistake. This is exactly their plan. They are torturing Ukrainian civilians to try to break the spirit of Ukrainians. But another thing that is a big shame, I believe, is that now it's not only Ukraine under the attack of Russia, but also many European cities and countries. Just recently, there were a few months ago, when I had a conversation with my colleague from German Bundestag, he had extra few hours in Munich airport because of Russians, because there were some hostile drones flying above the airport, and the airport was basically shut down for a few hours. It's Munich, it's Germany.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, Halyna.
How should we feel about that? Yeah. How should Europeans feel about that? I believe that's a huge alarm. It's a huge alarm, and it means that it's actually time to finish starting and start finishing things.
Indeed.
We need some actions, not just talks.
And Halyna, I wonder how depressed or worried you are by the fact that you can no longer rely on the Americans to help you out. Because, for instance, Steve Witkoff, the president's big golfing buddy, real estate buddy, and envoy to just about everywhere, has been to Moscow 7 times. He has not been to Kyiv once.
I believe because he's afraid for his life, because it's quite dangerous in Kyiv nowadays. And I believe he does not want to experience air alarms in the middle of the night. But once again, maybe it's a signal to actually start doing something. I can't say that we don't rely absolutely on US anymore because, nevertheless, they are trying to behave as mediators to finish the war, and Ukrainians really want to finish the war. But there is a very important point. We want to finish the war. We don't want to stop it, just like Russians kind of stopped it for a year or two without major activities on the front line, but then they came back again with a full-scale invasion in 2022 with more tanks, more soldiers, and more atrocities among civilians. We don't want that. Okay. We don't want to pass the war to our children. We want it to stop.
Indeed. Stay there, Halyna. I want to bring in Jonas Malmgrea, CEO of the Swedish investment company Front Ventures. Jonas, you belong to a country that joined NATO after years of not doing so because of the Russian aggression. And you're looking at this new club that you've joined that seems to be sort of falling apart as it tries to keep itself together because of what the Americans have done. How frustrated are you by the reality of what you see in Europe and in its effort to stand up to Russia?
Yeah, no, it's a very valid pointer, right? I think we have been underinvesting in the defense sector in Europe for the last 20 years. And that is really hitting back on us hard right now. I do see some progress there. I mean, we have been allocating significant amounts of budgets in the last years across the many countries in Europe now. But we're still really not learning what's happening in Ukraine. And that's actually what we are focusing on, trying to listen to what the Ukrainian government want to focus on, try to add capacity on the ground, and also build a linkage into Europe. So I think we also need to understand that we cannot just put more money on an old system, which is currently what is happening in most countries. We really need to work with Ukraine and learn how this war have changed warfare as we have known it for the last decades. And that's, I think, where we really need to step up in Europe. There was a very recent NATO war game happening only last week that came to the conclusion that we were basically wiped out in that war game because we have not been adapting to the reality of what's happening on the Ukrainian front line. So we have a significant journey ahead of us. At least I think we have the budgets allocated. But we also need to ensure that those budgets goes into a new type of thinking about how to defend Europe and talk with Ukraine and not just ask them what they need, but actually work with them in a joint defense development.
Because there's nothing like a country at war trying to defend itself from an aggressor to understand how you fight a war. And Ukraine is doing that every single week. They've developed extraordinary, technology when it comes to drone warfare and cyber warfare and all these other things. And I just wonder, whether we, in Europe, our politicians keep talking about the threats we face from Russia, but the population is not in that mindset. And there are many people, I can see them now online, who are saying, don't be such a warmonger, Matt Frei. Don't keep talking about war. We live in a world of peace. Let's try and make peace with the Russians. Our populations, our industries are not in the right place to do what our politicians have told us we should do, which is to face up to the threat.
No, definitely right. And I actually, to give a recent example here, we are right now working with a number of Ukrainian companies in establishing additional testing and production capacity, both in Ukraine and outside of Ukraine. The example is that drone testing for us, even if we now have a request from an army procurement department, it takes 7 months to book a test field. So we need to wait for 7 months to actually do the testing. In Ukraine, we do the testing the day after we have a new version of a drone or a payload. So the whole mindset on procurement processes on also needs to change. And I think here in the Nordics, we have seen that we know that we will be the next target after Ukraine. And the only thing that Russia will understand is strength. So that's important we step up. We cannot just sit and talk about that we should try to negotiate with Russia and so on. That was maybe the case 10 years ago, so that's no longer the case. So I think it's a mindset shift we need to do in Europe and understand that the war is here right now. It's not maybe in the future, and we need to take the hard decisions to change right now.
I have one question for you, Jonas, though. If the Russians have been unable to move the front line significantly beyond a few miles, after 4 years of war, where they've sacrificed maybe 1 million men or so, where they have an economy that's geared entirely towards this conflict, they have not been able to do that in Ukraine where they are present. How on earth could they roll their tanks into the Baltic republics or let alone into Sweden and Finland?
I think there's a very simple answer to that. When the war started, Ukraine had, I would say, the second largest army in Europe that was capable on actually defending the country. Europe would not have been able to do what Ukraine has been doing since the war started. And also the capabilities we have right now, we don't have the capability in the Baltics or in EU that they do have in Ukraine. And also just look at the map. You can roll from the Russian border and take most of the Baltics in 1 or 2 days. That did not happen in Ukraine, and we are right now not ready if that move will happen. So
we're much weaker. We are much weaker in Europe than the Ukrainians were even 4 years ago.
Definitely, that's the case.
Well, that's a sobering thought to end on.